Yes.
The Honorable Assemblyman Kevin Kiley.
Give him a clap or something.
Come on. Yeah. It's a little bright, like I said, so thank you.
You want me to sit or stand? We'll sit. We'll sit. So, I don't know how many of you have seen in the news, but Assemblyman Kevin Kiley and James Gallagher have been champions for us in the state of California. And this week, Kevin Kiley and James Gallagher took Gavin Newsom to court. And Kevin, we just want to thank you, but we want you to give them an update, tell them what's happening. There's a lot of people that have no idea this is taking place. What has that been like for you? What's that journey looked like, and where are we headed?
Sure. Well, thank you for the chance to be here and for putting this conference today on. It's so important. And I've been fighting the governor for much of this year, actually, and on a lot of fronts. He's actually my constituent, by the way. He lives in Fair Oaks. You don't necessarily want to be mixing it up with your constituents so much. And yeah, we've been fighting him in court, and we had a big hearing in Sutter County yesterday. And I got to tell you, I have never been more uplifted by the prayers of so many people in my entire time in politics. I mean, I'll post an update on this case on Facebook, and hundreds of people will respond saying, we're praying for you. We're praying for strength. We're praying for the right outcome. And I've never seen the faith community more engaged. And I think that it is potentially leading to something very powerful that could fundamentally realign this state's politics, but in a way that's desperately needed. But as far as the case goes, so, we have watched this year as our whole system of checks and balances, our Constitution has collapsed into a one-person government. And myself and Assemblymember Gallagher were watching this in the early stages of the COVID response. And, slowly but surely, or really not even that slowly, it evolved from the governor taking the sort of actions you'd expect an executive to take in a public health crisis to simply taking over all branches of government for himself and doing our job as legislators, creating new laws. So we actually, fought back in a number of ways. We tried to convince the legislature to do something, to hold hearings, to do oversight, and of course there was no interest in any of that. So we then introduced a resolution to actually terminate the state of emergency. Some people might not know that the legislature actually has the power to terminate the state of emergency, extinguish the governor's emergency powers. This is Assembly Concurrent Resolution 196, and we figured, well, at the very least, it could sort of be a negotiating tactic. You can use it to rein in the governor a little bit. Never got a hearing. To the contrary, the legislature took 12 weeks off in the middle of the pandemic. We were going to come back, and then one person got the virus, and so 2 more weeks off for everyone, no legislature. And then, despite missing all of those weeks, the legislature decided to take a 4-month recess at the end of the year. So the legislature has very much aided and abetted what the governor has been doing. So given that the second branch of government was unable to assert itself and fight for checks and balances, we turned to the third branch of government, the judiciary. And sued the governor under one particular executive order where he decided to change the rules for the election on his own, all mail ballots to everyone, and all of these other changes that he made. But what we're seeking is a precedent that applies much more broadly and says that what the governor has been doing is not allowed by the state of California. He's using what's known as the Emergency Services Act to claim that so long as this state of emergency exists, our state is actually an autocracy. And that's not hyperbole. He's actually said in court filings in our case twice, and this is a quote, that the Emergency Services Act centralizes all of the state's powers in the hands of the governor. That's what he says. And our argument is that, well, no, it doesn't actually. That's not what this act does. It was designed to allow for a robust response to a clear and present emergency. It wasn't supposed to lead to all of the state's powers being in one person's hand for months on end. And if that is what the law does, then it's plainly unconstitutional. And in fact, the Michigan Supreme Court just came to that very determination with respect to their own emergency services law. Last week, they struck it down as unconstitutional, immediately ending all of the governor there's emergency orders.
That's great. That's great. So for the hundreds, thousands of people watching this, a lot of people think there's no hope in California. A lot of people, I know dozens of friends and family that have fled the state of California and gone elsewhere. as one of the few Christian conservative representatives that we have in our state legislature, what would you say to those people that seem like California is a lost cause?
Well, I'd say first that's a very rational point of view. I mean, it's, it feels that way sometimes. When we see just the state things continue to get worse and worse and worse. And frankly, what's been happening this year has simply accelerated trends that were years in the making. California already had the least representative state government in the country, the most insular capital, the fewest avenues for public participation. But one of the challenges that many of us have faced in trying to create political change in California is that people just aren't dialed into state politics that much. They know that quality of life in our state is going down. 53% of people in a survey before COVID said they're thinking of leaving California. I mean, think about that. That's called a failed state when half of your people want out, right? But it's not been connected to the failures at our capital, and I think that what's happened this year has really fixed people's attention and drawn the link between cause and effect in a way that it hasn't been done before. And I think that's why you see so much energy not only in the faith community, but in many communities throughout California to bring about meaningful change. And I think that what I really worry about most is that we're seeing just grievous damage to the civic institutions of our state when you have month after month after month of a one-person government. And in a brief we filed a few weeks ago in this case, in this dispositive motion we did, we said that the collapse of Republican government, it doesn't always come from the sudden arrival of Caesar on the scene, but through the steady erosion of habits and practices that might have actually had a legitimate starting place. The very next week, as if to prove our point, Governor Newsom issued a unilateral executive order banning gas-powered vehicles by 2035. That's not an emergency order. He didn't even cite the Emergency Services Act. He just went ahead and did it on his own. We have habituated one-person government in California. He did the same thing yesterday. He did the same thing a few days ago with this new reason to shut down communities called the equity metric that actually uses emergency powers to strip citizens of their most basic liberties and shut down communities, not for public health purposes, but to impose a notion of equity that's been invented by the government. There are some very bad precedents for that sort of thing in world history.
Yeah, wow. Well, for people that, obviously this is one of the most important issues and moments in California history, how can people stay up to date with what you and James Gallagher are doing?
Well, we are both on social media, on Facebook and all the other outlets, Twitter and so forth. And so you can follow us there. And I really think that what you're doing with this conference is a very, very valuable thing because, Gavin Newsom, the other side, they're constantly not only imploring people to vote, 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 but using the power that they have to, make that more likely. And they've actually been caught doing that in very bad ways, in illegal ways recently. But I will add this, that voting should not be the end of the story, that voting is supposed to be the beginning of political participation, not the end of it. And when you see folks like the governor who only care about citizen participation insofar as it is necessary to award them power, that's not the way our government is supposed to work. When we look at what Republican government is supposed to be in the full sense of the term, it's what Tocqueville described in Democracy in America, where you had every citizen of every kind, from the highest to the lowest station in life, that was just engaged in a blizzard of conversation and discussion. And it wasn't the sort of rancor. I'm sure that people disagree, but it was actually how we constructed our shared identity and how we conducted our public life, and that everyone felt they had a stake in it. And for years and years and years in California, that has been eroding. And we've been pushing people out, and we've been saying that your voices don't matter. And that's never been truer, of course, than it has been this year.
I know that partisanship is very strong on both sides of the aisle. But obviously the Democrats are, and again, I'm saying this taking off my 501c3 hat as a private citizen, the Democrats, I think, really have taken it to new levels here in the state of California. My question is, I had a glimmer of hope earlier this year because I saw a news report where they were citing you and Assemblyman Gallagher, but they actually interviewed a few of your Democrat colleagues in the legislature, and they were actually initially kind of grumbling and saying, some of these powers that the governor is enacting, these really belong to the legislature. Behind the scenes, off camera, do you have any hope for your colleagues on the other side of the aisle that if this lawsuit gains some momentum, it's going to maybe even get them to rediscover their backbones a little bit?
That's possible, and you're right. There were a few comments along those lines. Phil Ting, who's the Democrat in San Francisco, said the governor's acting like he has the complete authority to do whatever he wants. But all in all, there's just been no willingness on the part of the legislature to do anything. So maybe if we have some success in the courts, I mean, what's happened in Michigan is that because the governor has been deprived of that authority to act on her own, that's actually now forced negotiations with the legislature, which, not to say that necessarily lead to a great outcome here in California, but at least it would be mindful of our institutional design, our constitutional design, and there would be some semblance of a process that the public can participate in.
Great. Well, thank you, Assemblymember Kevin Kiley, for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it, and we're praying for you as you continue this battle with
Thank you
Governor
very much.
Gavin Newsom.
And your Twitter account, Facebook, where people can follow the lawsuit?
Okay, so Facebook is Kevin Kiley CA. Twitter is the same, Kevin Kiley CA, as in California, and Instagram as well, if you happen to be on that. I have a blog too. You can just go to my kevinpkiley.com. It'll take you there.
That's great. That's great. Thank you, Kevin, so much. We are, yeah, give it up.